March 14, 1943, North Atlantic, 52 degrees north, 31 degrees west. The iron walls of U-boat 384 trembled with the rhythm of diesel engines pushing through cold Atlantic water. Kapitän-Leutnant Hans Joachim Herbschleb stood in the control room, salt-crusted chart spread before him, plotting intercept courses for convoy HX-229. The air tasted of machine oil, unwashed bodies, and stale bread. 48 men breathed. The same recycled oxygen in a steel tube 220 feet long and 20 feet wide. Outside, the ocean stretched gray and infinite. Inside, red emergency lights painted every face the color of old blood. Herbschleb had made this crossing 17 times. He had sent 63,000 tons of Allied shipping to the ocean floor. He believed the Atlantic belonged to Germany. He believed wrong. At 03:47 hours, the hydrophone operator pressed his headphones tighter against his skull and whispered two words that changed everything. Propeller sounds. Not the slow merchant thrum they hunted, but the aggressive high speed. Churn of a destroyer cutting water at 28 knots. HMS Swale. Flower-class corvette. 925 tons. Crew of 85. And mounted forward on her deck, something German submariners had never seen before. A weapon system called Hedgehog. 24 spigot mortars arranged in 4 rows of 6, each loaded with a 65-pound contact-fused projectile. The British had stopped hunting submarines with depth charges that exploded at preset depths, giving U-boats time to dive deep and slip away into thermal layers. Hedgehog didn't explode unless it hit something solid. No detonation meant no contact. Detonation meant death. There was no middle ground, no near miss, no warning, and the mathematics of survival had just collapsed to zero. The transformation of anti-submarine warfare didn't announce itself with fanfare. It arrived in March 1941 as a classified project developed by the Admiralty's Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, a division whose bureaucratic name concealed some of the most lethal innovation of the war. The weapon emerged from a simple tactical observation. Depth charges required a pursuing vessel to pass directly over a submerged submarine, losing sonar contact at the critical moment of attack. The target disappeared into a blind zone. By the time depth charges sank to detonation depth, the U-boat had often maneuvered away. The kill rate hovered around 4%. 4 successful destructions for every 100 attacks. German submariners learned to survive through evasion, diving to 600 feet, altering course, waiting for the pattern of explosions to pass overhead like distant thunder. They had adapted to a predictable rhythm of maritime warfare. Hedgehog shattered that rhythm. The weapon fired forward, throwing a circular pattern of mortar bombs 250 yards ahead of the attacking vessel while sonar contact remained locked. The projectiles arced through salt air, falling into the sea in a precise oval formation, covering 120 feet by 140 feet. They sank at 23 feet per second. If the submarine lay anywhere within that pattern, the warhead struck the pressure hull and detonated on contact with 35 pounds of Torpex explosive. The blast didn't need to be large. A submarine's strength came from its sealed integrity. One rupture was enough. Water pressure at depth would do the rest, compressing steel, flooding compartments, crushing men against bulkheads as the ocean reclaimed the space humans had temporarily borrowed. The British tested Hedgehog against derelict submarine hulls off Portsmouth. Every direct hit resulted in catastrophic hull failure. Every hit was fatal. And the system's accuracy, when paired with Type 144 sonar, reached 63%. For every 3 attacks, 2 U-boats died. The mathematics had reversed. Herbschleb ordered the dive. U-384 tilted forward. Bow planes angled down. Flooding valves open. Seawater rushed into ballast tanks with the sound of torrential rain against metal. The submarine dropped through thermal layers. Depth gauge needles rotating clockwise. 100 meters, 150 meters, 180 meters. The hull groaned under increasing pressure. Rivets squeaked. Condensation formed on every surface. Men gripped handholds and waited. Above them, HMS Swale maintained sonar lock. The ASDIC operator reported range decreasing, 800 yards, 600 yards, 400 yards. The corvette's bow cut through swells, her forward weapon system training on calculated firing coordinates. At 250 yards, the order came. Fire. 24 mortar bombs launched in 2.5 seconds. The recoil barely registered on Swale's deck. Sailors watched the projectiles disappear into dark water, trailing bubbles. Inside U-384, the crew heard nothing at first. No depth charge rumble. No distant concussion. Just silence, which felt wrong. Depth charges announced themselves. This silence carried a different message. Then the first bomb struck the submarine's port side, just aft of the control room. The Torpex charge detonated on impact with a sound, like a steel cathedral collapsing. The pressure hull ruptured inward. A jet of seawater entered the submarine at 180 pounds per square inch, the force sufficient to cut a man in half. The ocean didn't flood in, it exploded in. A solid battering ram of Atlantic water compressed by depth. Herbschleb had 90 seconds, from the first hit to the moment the submarine exceeded crush depth. He used 40 of those seconds understanding what had happened. The remaining 50 weren't enough. The second Hedgehog bomb struck near the stern, rupturing fuel tanks and hydraulic lines. Diesel oil mixed with seawater, creating a toxic brown fog that filled compartments faster than men could close watertight doors. The submarine's stern dropped. The bow rose at a 30-degree angle. Men tumbled backward, colliding with equipment, breaking bones against steel. Emergency lighting failed. Darkness swallowed everything except the sound of water winning its ancient war against human engineering. The third bomb hit the conning tower, collapsing it like a tin can under a boot. The fourth and fifth bombs struck the forward torpedo room, detonating stored torpedoes in a secondary explosion that vaporized the bow section entirely. U-384 broke into 3 pieces at 190 meters depth. The pressure hull crumpled. 48 men died in less time than it takes to boil water for tea. The wreckage tumbled down through darkness, settling into Atlantic mud at 2,400 meters. Above, HMS Swale's crew heard the unmistakable sound of bulkheads collapsing under pressure. A series of metallic shrieks and bangs transmitted through water. The ASDIC operator reported target destroyed. The corvette resumed patrol. Total engagement time, 6 minutes. The British didn't celebrate. They simply marked one more grid square cleared and moved to the next hunting zone. German Naval Command called it Der Schwarze Mai, Black May. In May 1943 alone, Allied forces sank 43 U-boats, 43 steel coffins, and 1,720 men. The loss rate exceeded 50%. For every 2 submarines that left port, 1 never returned. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, withdrew his submarines from the North Atlantic on May 24, 1943. The decision appeared in naval logs as a temporary tactical redeployment. It was surrender in everything but name. The technology that had terrorized Allied shipping for 3 years, the Wolfpack tactics, the night surface attacks, The patient hunting had become obsolete overnight, not through lack of courage or skill, but through mathematics. Hedgehog changed the equation. The British could now kill submarines faster than Germany could build them. Faster than Germany could train crews. Faster than ideology could manufacture motivation. The weapon's effectiveness didn't stem from explosive power alone. Depth charges, when they detonated near a submarine, created a massive pressure wave that could crack welds, shatter gauges, and terrorize crews. But unless the explosion occurred within 20 feet of the hull, the submarine often survived. The blast dissipated through water. Hedgehog eliminated dissipation. Contact fuses meant the explosive energy transferred directly into the pressure hull at the moment of impact. The 35-pound warhead might seem small compared to a 300-pound depth charge, but concentration mattered more than quantity. An ice pick through the skull kills as efficiently as a sledgehammer. Hedgehog was the ice pick, and British corvettes carried enough ammunition for multiple attacks. If the first pattern missed, a second pattern launched within 90 seconds, and a third, and a fourth. The U-boat couldn't surface. Aircraft controlled the sky. It couldn't run. Destroyers were faster. It couldn't hide. Sonar penetrated thermal layers. It could only wait and hope the pattern fell wide. Hope became the only tactic. And hope wasn't enough. Survivors from U-boats sunk by Hedgehog attacks were rare. Of the 783 German submarines lost during the war, approximately 47 were destroyed. By Hedgehog systems, of those 47, exactly 9 men survived to become prisoners of war. 9 men from approximately 1,880 crew members, a survival rate of 0.47%. The difference between depth charge attacks and Hedgehog attacks showed clearly in casualty statistics. When a submarine survived a depth charge barrage, the crew often suffered injuries from concussion, broken equipment, fire, or chlorine gas, from cracked batteries, but the hull remained intact long enough for emergency procedures. Controlled blows, emergency ascent, abandoned ship. Hedgehog attacks left no time for procedures. The hull failed. The ocean entered. Men died. The few who survived described the same sequence. Impact sound like a hammer on an anvil, immediate flooding, lights, failing, pressure change that ruptured eardrums, then cold black water, and the sensation of being pulled down into infinite depth. Those who reached the surface faced hypothermia in water that averaged 4 degrees Celsius. Survival time in North Atlantic water, 12 to 18 minutes before unconsciousness, 20 to 30 minutes before death. The 9 who lived were pulled from the water within 8 minutes of their submarine's sinking, already hypothermic, already damaged, but alive through a combination of proximity to rescue vessels and extraordinary physiological resilience. The German Navy attempted countermeasures. They installed rubber coating on submarine hulls to absorb sonar pings, the Alberic system, but it reduced speed and peeled away in rough seas. They developed deeper diving boats capable of reaching 280 meters, buying an extra 30 seconds of survival time, which mathematics proved insufficient. They experimented with acoustic torpedoes that homed on destroyer propeller noise, achieving limited success, but never enough to reverse the strategic balance. The fundamental problem remained unsolvable. A submarine's strength was invisibility, but radar, sonar, and aircraft had stripped that advantage away. Hedgehog was simply the final mechanical expression of that revelation. The U-boat as a weapon system had been rendered obsolete not through single innovation, but through layered technological evolution. Long-range patrol aircraft forced submarines to remain submerged. Improved sonar detected them underwater. Hedgehog killed them before they could escape. Each layer compressed the tactical options until none remained. Kapitänleutnant Herbschleb never understood what killed him. The weapon system was classified. German intelligence had intercepted rumors of a forward-throwing mortar system, but tactical details remained fragmentary. U-boat commanders received warnings about new Allied anti-submarine weapons, but nothing specific enough to change doctrine. They continued using evasion tactics developed against depth charges, deep diving, silent running, course changes, tactics that proved worthless against a weapon that struck before the submarine knew it was under attack. The 90 seconds from first impact to structural failure were spent in confusion, not comprehension. Men died without understanding how. That ignorance was itself a weapon. Fear requires knowledge. If submariners had known exactly how Hedgehog worked, morale might have collapsed earlier. Instead, they blamed bad luck, superior Allied numbers, tactical mistakes, anything except the truth that the technological foundation of submarine warfare had shifted beneath them like a subduction zone rearranging the ocean floor. The symbolic weight of Hedgehog extended beyond its tactical function. The weapon represented industrial capacity, translated into maritime dominance. Britain, besieged and bombed, still manufactured advanced weapons systems in sufficient quantities to equip corvettes and destroyers across the Atlantic. The United States, entering the war with relatively modest naval traditions, produced destroyer escorts mounting Hedgehog systems at the rate of one hull every 17 days in 1943. Germany, with its continental focus and resource limitations, couldn't match that production tempo. They built 40 U-boats per month at peak production. The Allies sank them faster. The mathematics became existential. Every submarine required 1,500 tons of steel, 14 months of construction time, and a BIBE crew that took 2 years to train to operational effectiveness. Every Hedgehog projectile required 65 pounds of steel and explosive, 2 hours to manufacture, and a crew that could be trained in 3 weeks. The exchange rate favored the Allies catastrophically. This wasn't a battle of courage or ideology. It was a battle of industrial calculus, and Germany was solving for the wrong variables. March turned to April. April turned to May. The casualty reports accumulated in naval command offices in Berlin. U-91 sunk by Hedgehog off Greenland. U-432 destroyed by HMS Sunflower. U-191 lost to HMS Hesperus. U-954 HMS Starling. U-456 HMS Opportune. Each report followed the same pattern. Sonar contact, engagement range, 250 yards, multiple explosions, target destroyed. No survivors. The repetition became liturgical. The U-boat service, once the pride of the Kriegsmarine, the technical elite that terrorized convoys and sank capital ships, became a suicide posting. Volunteer rates dropped. Morale collapsed. Men reported for duty knowing they had a 75% chance of dying before completing their first patrol. They went anyway, driven by duty, propaganda, coercion, or the simple inertia of military service in a totalitarian state. But the belief that had sustained them, the belief that skill and courage could overcome material disadvantage, corroded with every patrol that failed to return. By autumn 1943, U-boat crews didn't expect to sink merchant ships. They expected to die, and they were correct. The Hedgehog projectile itself was mechanically simple, almost primitive in its construction. A steel cylinder, a contact fuse, an explosive charge. No guidance system, no propulsion beyond the initial mortar launch. It fell through water like a stone, inert until contact. This simplicity was strategic genius. Complex systems require complex supply chains, specialized maintenance, and vulnerable infrastructure. Simple systems work under battlefield conditions, survive logistical disruptions, and can be manufactured by semi-skilled labor in dispersed factories. Britain produced Hedgehog projectiles in textile mills, converted to munitions work, staffed, largely by women who had never worked in manufacturing before the war. The United States manufactured them in automotive plants between shifts making truck engines. The weapon's effectiveness didn't require precision engineering. It required volume. And volume was something Allied industrial capacity could provide without strain. By war's end, approximately 180,000 Hedgehog projectiles had been manufactured and deployed. The vast majority never struck a target. They sank into the ocean, corroded, and eventually dissolved into particulate iron oxide. But the threat of those projectiles, the knowledge that every convoy escort might carry Hedgehog, was enough to make North Atlantic operations unsustainable for the U-boat fleet. The psychological dimension of Hedgehog attacks exceeded their physical impact. Depth charge attacks, however terrifying, followed a predictable rhythm. The submarine's crew heard the destroyer overhead, felt the pattern of explosions, counted the detonations, and waited for silence. The experience was traumatic but comprehensible. Hedgehog attacks provided no rhythm to anticipate, no warning explosions, just sudden impact and structural failure. The unpredictability shattered trained responses. Men couldn't prepare psychologically for an event that provided no warning. Combat stress casualties among U-boat crews increased sharply in 1943, with medical reports documenting symptoms that modern psychiatry would recognize as acute anxiety disorders and PTSD, though German naval medicine lacked those classifications and treated such cases as cowardice or malingering. Men who survived one patrol often refused to sail on another, despite threats of court-martial. The invisible psychological casualties of Hedgehog exceeded the visible physical casualties. The weapon killed submarines, but it also killed the willingness to cruise submarines, which in strategic terms was more valuable. The Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic wasn't singular, but cumulative. Enigma decryption provided intelligence. Long-range patrol aircraft provided coverage. Improved convoy tactics provided defense. Hedgehog provided the killing blow. But among these factors, Hedgehog represented something specific: the translation of tactical innovation into mechanical form. Someone at the Admiralty Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development looked at depth charge attack patterns, recognized the fundamental flaw, loss of sonar contact at the critical moment, and designed a solution. That solution required no exotic materials, no theoretical physics, no revolutionary breakthrough. It required clear thinking about the geometry of anti-submarine warfare. The weapon succeeded not because it was technologically advanced, but because it was appropriately matched to the problem. This distinction matters. Wars aren't won by the most sophisticated technology, but by technology that solves the right problem, at the right scale. Hedgehog solved the problem of how to maintain sonar contact while attacking a submerged submarine. That solution was worth more than a fleet of battleships. The human cost of U-boat operations remains staggering in its totality. Germany built 1,162 U-boats during the war. Of those, 783 were lost to enemy action. Of the 40,000 men who served in U-boats, approximately 28,000 died, a casualty rate of 70%, the highest of any branch in any military service in any nation during the war. Those numbers transcend statistics. They represent 28,000 individual deaths, most occurring in the dark, in cold water, in steel tubes that became tombs. Many drowned. Many were crushed by pressure. Some died instantly from explosions. Others survived the sinking only to die slowly. In the North Atlantic, watching rescue ships sail past because stopping to pick up survivors would endanger the convoy. The cruelty wasn't intentional. It was mathematical. Convoy escorts couldn't risk their primary mission to save men from a sunken submarine. The war imposed brutal calculus on everyone it touched. Hedgehog simply accelerated that calculus, compressing the timeline from engagement to death into 90 seconds. By summer 1944, Hedgehog had been supplemented by improved variants. The Squid system, which fired 3 large mortar bombs in a triangular pattern, and the Mouse Trap, a simplified version for smaller vessels. The technological lineage was clear. Each iteration improved accuracy, increased pattern density, or simplified operation. But Hedgehog remained in service through war's end because it worked. Military organizations are deeply conservative institutions. They resist change, cling to proven systems, and mistrust innovation. Once a military organization adopts a new weapon system enthusiastically, that adoption signals the weapon has passed every test of reliability, effectiveness, and cost. Hedgehog passed those tests. It became standard equipment on Allied corvettes, destroyers, and destroyer escorts. It was installed on American, British, Canadian, and French vessels. The weapon that began as a classified project in 1941 became a ubiquitous element of Allied naval operations by 1944, as common as radar or sonar. That ubiquity tells its own story. The last U-boat sunk by Hedgehog attack was U-325, destroyed on April 30, 1945, in the North Sea by HMS Red Mill. 3 days later, Germany surrendered. The timing feels symbolic, though history rarely arranges itself so neatly. The U-boat war effectively ended in May 1943, when Donitz withdrew from the North Atlantic. The remaining 2 years saw sporadic operations, technological desperation, schnorkel systems, hydrogen peroxide propulsion, acoustic homing torpedoes, but never strategic relevance. The Battle of the Atlantic was lost in 1943. The weapon that defined that loss more than any other was a simple mortar system that threw 65-pound projectiles 250 yards forward into a circular pattern. Hedgehog didn't win the battle alone, but it delivered the killing blow to a submarine force that had terrorized Allied shipping for 3 years. And it did so with mechanical efficiency, without drama, without mercy. The submariners who died in those attacks left no memorials. U-boat graves lie scattered across the Atlantic floor, unmarked and unmourned except by families who received telegrams stating their sons or husbands were missing at sea, presumed dead. The ocean keeps those secrets. Occasionally, deep sea surveys locate a wreck, an intact pressure hull or scattered debris field. Marine archaeologists photograph the remains, measure the damage patterns, document the site, and move on. These wrecks are war graves protected by international agreement. No salvage is permitted. The men who died inside those steel tubes remain there, preserved in cold, dark water, surrounded by the machinery they trusted to keep them alive. The machinery failed, not through defect or poor construction, but because another machine designed specifically to kill it performed its function with 90 seconds of devastating efficiency. The final meditation on Hedgehog requires acknowledging what the weapon represents beyond its tactical function. It represents the industrialization of warfare reaching a logical endpoint where human skill becomes irrelevant. The submarine commanders who died in 1943 weren't less skilled than those who survived 1940. They were facing a different war, a war where detection systems, aircraft coordination, and forward-throwing mortars had compressed tactical options to zero. Individual courage meant nothing against systematic technological superiority. The best submarine commander in the world couldn't evade a weapon he didn't know was locked onto him until the moment it struck. This realization, that skill and courage had become insufficient, marked a transition in military history. Wars had always involved technology, but World War II demonstrated that technology could negate human factors entirely. The submarine. War became a contest between detection systems and stealth systems, between production capacity and attrition rates, between innovations delivered faster than the enemy could adapt. In that contest, Germany lost. They lost not because their submarines were poorly designed or their crews inadequately trained, but because the Allies industrialized anti-submarine warfare more effectively than Germany could industrialize submarine construction. 90 seconds. That's the interval between first impact and final structural failure. 90 seconds for water to flood compartments, for pressure to exceed hull strength, for a submarine to drop past crush depth into the abyss. 90 seconds for 48 men to understand they were dying. Not enough time to write letters. Not enough time to pray effectively. Not enough time for anything except fear and the cold, black water. This is what Hedgehog delivered. Efficiency. Not cruelty, though the result was cruel. Not vengeance, though it must have felt like judgment to men who had sent thousands of merchant sailors to similar deaths. Just efficiency. The mechanical execution of a tactical problem solved through forward-thinking engineering. The weapon didn't hate. It didn't celebrate. It simply functioned, converting steel submarines into wreckage with industrial reliability. War ended. The weapons were decommissioned. Hedgehog systems were removed from ships, stored in arsenals, eventually scrapped for metal. The institutional knowledge remained. Post-war anti-submarine warfare doctrine built on lessons learned in the Atlantic. Modern navies deploy weapons far more sophisticated: homing torpedoes, helicopter-dropped depth charges, submarine-launched anti-submarine missiles, but the core principle remains identical. Detect the target, maintain contact, deliver weapons, before the submarine can evade. Hedgehog established that principle. Every anti-submarine weapon developed since 1943 is a descendant of that crude mortar system. The technology improved, but the logic remained. Today, the North Atlantic is empty of submarines hunting convoys. Commercial shipping crosses the ocean unmolested by military threats. The routes that German U-boats patrolled are now traveled by container ships, tankers, and cruise vessels. The ocean keeps its secrets. 3,000 meters below the surface, steel wrecks slowly corrode, becoming reefs, ecosystems for deep-sea life. The men inside those wrecks have become part of the ocean floor, their bones dissolved, their uniforms rotted, their identities reduced to names on casualty lists in German archives. They died believing they were defending their nation. They died because their nation built weapon systems that worked brilliantly in 1940 and failed catastrophically in 1943. They died because the other side industrialized faster, innovated more effectively, and translated tactical problems into mechanical solutions with 90 seconds of lethal efficiency. This is the truth Hedgehog reveals. Wars are won not by courage, but by capacity. Not by individual skill, but by systematic superiority. Not by better men, but by better systems. The German submariners who died in 1943 were no less courageous than those who succeeded in 1940. They simply faced an enemy that had learned to kill them faster than they could adapt. That lesson echoes across military history. The side that innovates faster, produces more, and distributes resources more efficiently wins. Everything else, the propaganda, the ideology, the appeals to national destiny, is noise. Hedgehog was signal. 24 mortar bombs, 250 yards, 90 seconds. None escaped.